Hey guys, today I want to break down one of the most secretive lines in all of palmistry. It's a line for your father. In this video, we're going to be looking at your relationship with him, his relationship with you, any past life karma you guys have, how your relationship with him is going to affect your married life, and also have a look at some spiritual blockages as well. So there's a fair bit to unpack here, so let's jump into it. The first thing I want to say about this is we should actually define the term father, because in Indian culture, your father is your god. Like literally, all the kids in India, as they're growing up, every morning they wake up and touch the feet of their father as almost a symbol for God. The reason for this is it's your father who introduces you to the world around you. He's the God of your world, so to speak. If you look at like Christianity, they've got like the heavenly father, then they've got your earthly father or your worldly father. It's a similar sort of thing in India. And if you're thinking, well, what about the mother? Why isn't she a god? Well, she is. She's technically the goddess. And Indian kids touch the feet of their mother every morning as well. So you've got your father as a god, you've got your mother as a goddess, and they both teach you how to interact with the world. But in this video, we're talking just about your father. So let me show you where the lines for that are first, then we'll break this whole thing down for you. So the lines for your father are located under your index finger. This is the area for Jupiter. So over here on the side, you'll see a really thick line. That's your dad. So let me tell you what Jupiter means first, and then it'll make sense why it's here. Jupiter in Indian mythology, he's like the teacher of the gods. He holds all the ancient wisdom and knowledge that's been passed down from previous generations. So you can see why the father line would appear over here. A lot of people are going to have some thinner lines just above or below this area over here. And those are the lines for your teacher or your guru, and also your older brothers. Because in Indian thinking, your teacher is actually equivalent to your father. And your older brothers also hold the equal position to your father. So remember I was saying before that your father is your god? Well, your teacher is your god, and so are your older brothers. In fact, there's a story out of Vedanta philosophy which says that if your teacher ever gets you to the point where you meet God, you must always touch the feet of your teacher before you touch the feet of God. Reason being, it's your teacher that got you to the place of recognizing God. And your father is the person that gets you to your teacher. So he's like the first step, then your teacher, then enlightenment. It kind of goes in that process. But the lines that I'm about to talk about for your father, they also apply for your teacher and also for your older brothers too. Alright, so let's have a look at some examples of this. Over here, we can see the father line very clearly on this person's hand. And the general key with this is you want to compare the thickness of this line to the thickness of the headline in general. Ideally speaking, this line should be about as thick as your headline is, or at least as colorful and as pronounced as that is. Because if that's the case, that means you actually have a reasonably well-balanced relationship with your father. If the headline is thicker than your father line, it means he's not that emotionally connected to you. And if it's the other way around, if the father line is thicker, then that means that you're overly attached to your father and almost to the detriment of your own ability to think independently for you. So there are a few variations that we do need to cover. So if you look at this picture over here, you see how the father line curves upwards into almost like a ring of Solomon, and that it ends in between the middle finger and the index finger. If that happens, that's a very good sign. It means your father is very spiritual and he's actually going to be guiding you spiritually throughout your life. This line in this arc can very easily be confused for a ring of Solomon, which is a similar line, but it takes like a bigger arc. In some other people's hands, you'll notice that the father line has islands in it. And that's not a good sign. That means your father is actually absent or abandoned you during your childhood. And the more islands, the greater that distance between you guys. So on this hand over here, for example, we can see 2 islands. This woman's father actually abandoned the family twice during her childhood. On the other hand, if you see forks on this line, well, that's a sign of an argumentative relationship. And generally, people who have like islands or forks or crosses on their father's lines, they normally have a very disruptive lifeline in the early part of their childhood. So if you look over here, for example, all the lines that cut and cross over here, that's a sign of a difficult childhood. And you could, for the most part, track this down to her father or her relationship with her father. One of the best combinations though is when the father line actually merges down into your lifeline. That's actually a sign of an excellent childhood, and also a sign of a father who's going to be very supportive of you throughout your life. So if you look at this person over here, you notice how the previous person had lots of cuts through their lifeline, whereas this one here, it's very smooth. This person actually had a great relationship with their father. He never abandoned them and never did anything bad or nasty. Okay, so that's your relationship with your father. Now we're going to have a look at your father's relationship with you. Look at the same area on this hand. You'll see these vertical lines that cut through here. That is your father's children and how he gets along with his kids. So over here, for example, we can see two lines here. One's diagonal and one is straight. The diagonal line is for this person's sister, and the straight line, that's for this guy because this person's male. So diagonal lines is female, straight lines is male. So you notice how the straight line is actually thicker than the diagonal one? That means this person's father was actually closer to them than they were to his sister. He was basically the favorite child of the father. And whilst that may be good for him, that wouldn't have been very good for his sister growing up. And looking at this hand over here, we can see three vertical lines. This is a hand of a woman, and the straight vertical lines are a sign of three sons. So this person has one sister and one brother, and her father raised all of his kids essentially to be like sons. She was taught to be very independent, very assertive, and very authoritative. And in today's day and age, that's considered normal, but in the olden days where palmistry was written, that was considered, illogical or irrational. Okay, so now we'll have a look at this hand over here. The father lines are very thin, but you can see it over there. You can also see another line over here, which is his older brother. And you see three vertical lines cutting through here, which means the older brother is actually going to end up having three kids. So this person will be an uncle to them. That's one question I get asked a lot. How many children will my siblings have? This is how you can tell how many your brother will have, the older brother specifically. Remember, the older brother is equal to the father in position in terms of the traditional Indian family hierarchy. And that's why his kids turn up in the same place as his father's kids. Okay, so here's another interesting example. We can see the father line over here. It's got an island in it. So that means right off the bat we can tell this person didn't get along very well with their father. We can see a line up here for an uncle. We can also see two lines very thin underneath for his older brothers. Now, what's going on here? He didn't get along with his uncle, and he certainly didn't get along with his father at all. So what we can tell about the family dynamic is, firstly, we see three children lines on the spaces for his older siblings. That means he's an uncle to three kids. Furthermore, we would have seen there'd be a very nasty dynamic between this person's father and his older brother. Remember, the older brother is equal to the dad, so his father's older brother is equal almost in a roundabout way to his grandfather, and that's where the islands come from here. Now I want to share with you a little secret that my grandfather taught me about this line. And this isn't something I've read in any of the palmistry books either. In fact, this line generally, or anything about this line, isn't in a lot of the traditional palmistry books. But let me give you a little family secret that I was taught. So what I want you to do is notice the similarities between your father's line and that of your marriage line. It's on the opposite side of the hand. Like over here, for example, we can see that this father would have been very spiritual with that upward branch, but we also see a fork. So this person was rebellious against their father, or they didn't get along with each other. And the father pretty much pursued spirituality to be on his own. If you look at the marriage line, there's actually a fork over here too. So the way this person got along, or his relationship with his father, translated into his relationship with his wife. This person essentially became a workaholic as they grew older. Just as their father was always absorbed in spirituality, this person escaped his relationship with his wife through working too hard. That's not a good thing to do. You don't want to repeat the mistakes of the previous generation. Now let me break this down a little bit in terms of Indian mythology. This space over here is Jupiter, and this one over here is Mercury. And in Indian mythology, Jupiter is the father of Mercury. The two of them don't get along very well because, according to the mythology, Mercury was born as a result of an affair the wife of Jupiter had with the moon god. And Jupiter didn't want to raise Mercury, but all the other gods intervened and they stopped him abandoning Mercury, and they said, you've got to raise this kid. So the two of them don't get along. And if you think of Jupiter as holding all the ancient wisdom of previous generations, Mercury holds all the knowledge of the here and now. Mercury is quick-witted intelligence, whereas Jupiter is ancient wisdom. And so they're almost the same, and yet at the same time they're almost opposites as well. It's kind of like the Sun and Saturn. They're father-son as well, and they don't get along with each other too. One brings light, the other brings darkness. But we're not going to talk about that right now. Let's get back to Jupiter and Mercury. They're opposites, but at the same time they actually correlate very strongly to each other. Your relationship with your father is your relationship with your spouse, unless you fix it. If there's something wrong with you and your dad, that means you need to take action to stop that pattern repeating into the next generation through your spouse and also your kids. Now, I want to teach you how to find your father, or the karma you have with your father from a past life. And the trick to that is to just turn the hand around and trace this line onto the back of the hand. And here's a pretty good example. And over here we can see the line for the father with a big island in the middle. That means the karma between these two people was actually one of abandonment in a previous life. That karma is going to replay itself at least once in this life. We can also see over here the karma this person has with his two uncles and also one of his older brothers. And relative to the father, they're actually pretty okay right now. Here's another example. This person has a very fractured line for her father going into a past life. That means essentially the relationship was fractured. They didn't get along very well previously, and that's translating into their life right now. And just as a side note, you can see the line for her older brother here with two children on it. In this lifetime, this person's older brother has two children. And so that karma is essentially replaying itself. Okay, so those are the lines for your father and what they mean, and also the karma between you guys. But what do you do with this? What if you have had a negligent or a bad father during your childhood? You can't just struggle with it, and you certainly don't want that energy carrying into your married life, or even worse, into your kids. You can shift this energy. Remember, the line for your father isn't specifically for your father. It translates very well to your teacher and also to your older siblings. So if you have a bad relationship with your dad, you can cultivate it through those people. What happens if you don't have any of those people in your life? There's one other solution for you, and that's to look at the lines for Sagittarius on your hands. That's the bottom phalange of the pinky finger. If you notice vertical lines over here, that's a sign of good energy with your parents and your ancestors, specifically your male ancestors. If you notice lots of horizontal lines here, that's a sign of debilitated energy with these people. And the way to clear that is to look into meditations dealing with Sagittarius specifically, or the planet Jupiter, because Jupiter ruled Sagittarius as per the Indian system. And that, guys, is how to tell the lines for your father and your karma with him. If you have any questions, put them in the comment section below. Otherwise, hit like, because that helps out our channel. And if you learned something, hit subscribe as well. Thank you very much.